GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Dewbs & Co, the show where we'll get into some of the things that have got you talking today. And of course, it's the start of another week, and one which very sadly sees the conflict in Ukraine continue. Tonight, I want to talk sanctions and refugees. The UK government has been criticised for not doing enough on birth counts, so I want your views on that. Are we doing enough? Should we be doing more? And what does that look like? I also want to talk energy, the cost of which, of course, is going up and up and up. What should we do next? And something that's really caught my eye. More and more companies are stopping selling their products and services to consumers in Russia. Personally, I've got to be honest, I can't help but think that this is virtue signalling gone mad. Why are they choosing this conflict over any of the others? And what about countries where, I don't know, say governments are committing horrific human rights abuses? And anyway, why should your average consumer be punished for the actions of their leader? Am I wrong? All of that to come tonight on Dewbs & Co. But first, let's have a look at the latest news headlines.
Good evening, I'm Polly Middlehurst, your latest news stories. Ukrainian officials have said a bread factory has been hit by a Russian airstrike today, just as negotiators got together for a third round of peace talks with Russia. Bodies of at least 13 civilians have been recovered from the scene. It comes as Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister said humanitarian corridors designed to allow civilians to flee cities besieged by Russia are still not open today. Most of the routes only allow access to either Russia or Belarus in the north, a move Ukraine has described as completely immoral. Ukraine's presidential advisor says almost 1,000 towns are without light, water or heating.
What's needed is a boycott of Russian exports, in particular the rejection of oil and its products from Russia. It can be called an embargo or just morality, like when you refuse to give money to a terrorist. Boycott Russian imports. If they don't want to comply with civilized rules, they should not receive goods and services from civilization either. Let the war feed them.
Ukrainian president speaking there. Well, today the Dutch Prime Minister claimed that Russia has been using cluster bombs in Ukraine, which are banned under the Geneva Convention. Speaking alongside the British and Canadian Prime Ministers this afternoon, Mark Rutte said we can only guess what Vladimir Putin will do next. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson said more needs to be done in supporting Ukraine, and he announced a further £175 million in aid.
This is the moment for Ukraine's friends to create a coalition of humanitarian, economic and defensive military support to ensure that Putin fails.
Boris Johnson. Well, Downing Street has acknowledged that sanctions against Russia will affect the cost of living here in the UK. Boris Johnson said that all options were on the table when asked about a ban on Russian oil. And he said the government was looking at using more British hydrocarbons to help with the pressure. He's expected to announce a strategy for tackling the energy supply in the coming days. And that comes as the average price of petrol rose to a record £1.55 a litre. Due to concerns over the reliability of supplies, diesel is also today at a record high. Priti Patel has told MPs more than 14,000 people have applied to come to the UK via the Ukraine Family Scheme visa. The Home Secretary also warned Ukrainians hoping to reach Britain could be exploited by people smugglers in Calais. Meanwhile, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer accused the Home Office of a chaotic response to the refugee crisis.
It's very important that we provide a route to sanctuary for those that are fleeing for their lives, and the Home Office is in a complete mess about this. They keep changing the rules. The stories of what's actually happening on the ground contradict what the Home Office say. They've got to sort this out. A simple route to sanctuary.
Well, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine shows that NATO needs to spend more on defence and improve the way the alliance works together. She told the Commons Foreign Affairs Committee there's no doubt the West didn't act early enough or decisively enough.
The reality is that President Putin did not take the threats of deterrence seriously enough. We have to strengthen NATO. We particularly have to strengthen the eastern flank. We've already deployed more troops into Estonia, but there is more to do. We have to be serious about defence spending right across NATO.
Liz Truss. Well, a growing number of organisations are terminating their relationships with Russia over the invasion of Ukraine. As you've been hearing, American Express, Netflix, KPMG and PricewaterhouseCoopers have all announced they'll no longer operate in Russia. TikTok has also blocked its Russian users from posting new videos. In other news today, experts are asking NHS England to prove that scrapping the 4-hour A&E waiting time target will improve patient care. It's set to be replaced by targets to see patients within 15 minutes of arriving at A&E for an initial assessment. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine, the Nuffield Trust and the King's Fund have all expressed their concerns that data from pilot studies hasn't yet been made public. And just lastly, the Canadian Prime Minister has said Her Majesty the Queen was as insightful as ever when he met her earlier today. The 95-year-old monarch welcomed Justin Trudeau at Windsor Castle after 2 weeks of carrying out only light duties. It's the first in-person engagement for Queen Elizabeth since catching COVID last month. Mr Trudeau was seen laughing during the meeting, whilst Her Majesty appeared to be in good spirits. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. Now more from Dewbs & Co.
Thanks for that, Polly. Well, keeping me company until 7 o'clock tonight. My panel, we've got Laurie Lebon-Langton, environmental policy researcher, Lucy Harris, who's the former Conservative MEP, Gareth Sturdy, a former foreign affairs journalist and now teacher and education consultant. What a change in career there, isn't it?
I like to keep myself busy.
Do you? It sounds like it, yeah. I mean, in the break, I want to know, I'm intrigued, which one do you enjoy the most, but keep that for the break. Anyway, you know the drill on Dewbs & Co as well. It's not just about us here and our thoughts, it's about you at home and yours. You can get in touch with me on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GBNews. In my intro, I was just asking you, Polly referenced it as well in the headlines about lots of the brands that are stopping their products and services into Russia. I was saying that I personally think it's a bit of virtue signalling, but it splits opinion. You lot have already started getting in touch with me and telling me your thoughts. You're not messing around, I can tell you. Anne and Terry and Pauline, to name just a few. You have been in touch telling me I am wrong. There you go. Am I wrong? I personally just think it's a bit peculiar. What has your average Russian citizen done to warrant not being able to buy, I don't know, food, clothes, whatever, from their favourite shops? Is it really their fault what Putin is doing? As I said, divided opinion on that, and you guys at home, you're not shy in telling me when you think I've got it wrong, and apparently on this topic, I have. We shall see. We'll have that conversation a bit further on in the show, but for now, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, alongside leaders from Canada and the Netherlands, have announced that the UK is setting up a support group to provide aid to Ukraine now and in the future. Johnson has also announced further funding into Ukraine. Let's have a listen for that.
This is the moment for Ukraine's friends to create a coalition of humanitarian, economic and defensive military support to ensure that Putin fails. And that's why today I'm announcing a further £175 million of UK aid for Ukraine, $100 million of which will be provided directly to the Ukrainian government.
Well, along with the injection of $175 million in aid for Ukraine, including $100 million going direct to the Ukrainian government, the UK will now have contributed £400 million in total to Ukraine. The Canadian PM, Justin Trudeau, has also announced that a further 10 Russians are going to face sanctions, which will include senior officials and oligarchs. Now, speaking of which, joining me is our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. I say speaking of which, Darren, because there's been a bit of criticism today, hasn't there, towards the UK government on a few counts, let's face it, whether it's sanctions for oligarchs, whether it's refugees. Bring us up to date with the latest, if you will.
Yeah, busy day here in Westminster, kind of focusing on, of course, what's been happening in Ukraine. As you said, that there's that trilateral meeting with Mark Rutte, Justin Trudeau and Boris Johnson. And also in Parliament, we saw the economic crime bill be introduced by the Home Secretary. In fact, MPs are still debating that at the moment, Michelle. This bill was due to crack down on the proceeds of crime way beyond and before this conflict started, but clearly its main mechanism now is to try and apply some of those sanctions that have come into place, that people are not able to launder their money essentially through London and elsewhere in the UK. Many fear, though, that it simply doesn't go far or quickly enough, not least of all because it may take months for some of these things to be implemented, which may allow some of the oligarchs to get their money out of the country. In saying that, I think what was fascinating, though, was even though the Home Secretary was talking about this economic crime bill, many of the questions from MPs from across the House, it must be said, Conservative MPs too, focused on what the UK was doing in regards to Ukrainian refugees. We know that well over 1 million have flooded into neighbouring countries such as Poland, Hungary, Romania, Moldova and others. And there are suggestions that Poland has taken almost 1 million. The UK, according to figures released at the weekends, suggests that we have taken 50. Now, the Home Secretary, the Prime Minister, disputes that figure. They say it is a lot higher. We're going to get official figures later on tonight. We're told that they're currently processing around 14,000 applications. But there is a sense that the UK, despite the words that the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary have used over the last week, has not been quick enough at trying to give refuge to Ukrainian refugees. Now, the government defends its position somewhat, saying it is helping, but also that it's not prepared to waiver, if you like, the visa scheme that we have here, aside from what they don't have in the EU. They argue, the Home Secretary continually argues, because of security concerns. But there is a sense, and Jeremy Hunt, senior Conservative MP tonight, has written to the Prime Minister saying that the government needs to do more on this, that people need help and they need it now.
Dan McCaffrey, that's our political editor there. Thanks for your updates. You guys have been getting in contact. Just a reminder, if you will, for our email address, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Stuart has emailed in saying, Dewbs, I'm going to stop watching you. I cannot believe that you think sanctions are unjust. You are simply unbelievable, says Stuart. Stuart, I'm not talking about sanctions per se. I'm not talking about oligarchs. I'm asking the question in my intro there about your everyday brands stopping, boycotting, if you will, selling their products and services to your everyday average consumer? That is the question that I'm asking you. I'm not talking about the sanctions, which I'm about to discuss now with the panel. I'm talking about measures that are directly hitting your everyday consumer. That's what I want your thoughts on tonight. But Gareth, for now, let's focus on the sanctions, the criticism that the UK government has been receiving about are they doing enough to sanction whether it's the Russian government, whether it's the oligarchs, in your mind?
Well, I mean, sanctions are pretty much one of the only levers we've got, aren't they? There is very little we can do in this situation, but sanctions is one of them. In reality, Putin brushes these off. They don't really affect him personally. In fact, for years, he's been very anxious to pull oligarchs, as we call them, back into the country to stop them going abroad. He's always had a problem with rich and successful Russian business people, Russian businessmen chiefly. So in a way, us just cracking down on these guys is possibly serving his agenda. It's difficult to tell because with this kind of blanket attitude of we must do something, it seems to me it's not discriminating or it risks not discriminating clearly enough between rich Russians in the UK who may actually be enemies of Putin, who are very interested in promoting liberal reforms in Russian society. If we just crack down on them because we feel it's the only thing we can do and we must be seen to be doing something, I think we actually risk using one or two levers in Russian society that might be useful to us. That would be my fear.
Laurie?
I think that the sanctions that could be placed on oligarchs that have been identified as being allies of Putin have not necessarily been as stringent as maybe could have happened. There are lots of loopholes. The government is looking at closing some of those loopholes. But this goes to the very point of sanctions, which is to try and place pressure on the regime, as we're hearing there. And general sanctions, many of them that have been implemented over the last week, will have an impact upon the wider population, right? And we've seen this time and time again in countries around the world that doesn't necessarily lead to the kind of change that we want, a regime to fall or to pull back from the action that it's taken. More targeted sanctions at the people or the functions that support those people, like the ability to launder money through London or influence political parties or the other things that we've heard in the news over this week, are something that also has to be considered. And they're not necessarily on the agenda as much as we need. We've experienced in this country over the last 10, 20 years, the creeping influence of Russian money in our media, in our politics, even to the point where we had an accusation at the weekend about the Prime Minister giving out certain rewards and peerages to people, even though there were concerns about national security in the context of that. These are the kind of things that the linkages between Russia and allies of Putin and then power in this country that we have got to break. And this has got to be the excuse, the final excuse for us to make that break.
There you go, Lucy, thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think it sends a direct message to Putin and Russia that if you want to get the benefits of Western culture and society, you have to play ball. And it also means strategically, what the West has technically done is they've blocked off a source of foreign exchange and foreign money that is quite valuable to them right now, considering the ruble has fallen quite so significantly. This means that they don't have that extra cash flow, they don't have the extra money to invest in a war that they've started. So it puts a time limit on that war, and it puts a time limit onto how long they can produce these, produce and sustain a war that is costing them a significant amount of money every day it continues. So it's a strategic thing to do, but also it's a way of saying to the Russians, if you want to do this, then you cannot be part of Western society. And I think that's an appropriate response.
Well, when you say it says to Russians, if you want to do this, then you can't be part of Western society, it's not your average Russian.
No, it's not the average
doing
Russian.
this.
No, it's the Russian government, absolutely. It's saying to the Russian government that if you are planning to continue this war, financial sanctions are going to prevent you from doing this. So it's strategic as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if I'm labouring this point a little bit, but I just find it quite peculiar. I've been watching social media over the last few days, and I've been watching all of the kind of hashtag boycott Coca-Cola, hashtag boycott this and boycott that. And I just I look at it and I see that there's all these brands. There's quite a big list, but there's lots of different consumer brands that have decided that they're not going to supply their product services to your average consumer in Russia. Now, this is very separate to what we were talking about a second ago, which is almost like, your what I'd call like your proper sanctions, your SWIFT banking, all those kind of things. I'm now talking about things like ASOS, like Apple, Pornhub. I mean, but this is what I'm saying. Russia, your average Russian person being able to watch porn or not, being able to buy Carlsberg or an iPad or OnlyFans. And I sit there and I just think, what is driving this? What is at the heart of these businesses saying, right, we're going to stop selling these products and services into Russia? Because it's not your average person on the street's fault. And I worry, looking at you, Laurie, but I worry that what's going to happen is we've already seen information wars. We've already seen information really getting kind of restricted as what you're going to see if you're in Russia. So all these people suddenly can't buy what they want. And I'm talking your average person. I'm not talking your Putin ally or your government official. I'm talking your average man and woman. Many of them are probably going to lose their jobs because if you're going to close down your factories or whatever. And I just think it's peculiar. And I can't help it. I find it virtue signalling.
I mean, I think on one side I can sympathise with companies who, are full with people who want to work out how they can do their bit. And I can see why some major brands have said we're going to pull operations because that's, for us, how we feel like we're going to do our bit. I mean,
but why aren't they doing that then in all the other places where there's conflict, where there's human rights abuses?
And I totally agree with that. And another question I'd ask is that there are certain brands, many of them that aren't the household names that you just listed off there, that provide goods and services to some of Putin's allies and certain oligarchs, the people who launder their money for them, the people who act as lawyers to make sure that they can escape sanctions and other rules and regulations around the world, the ones that give them the ability to set up shell companies in British tax havens and so on. And we should be going after those businesses as people who are enablers of his regime, as well as, of course, I agree with you, there's sort of complexities here. I mean, another issue with those brands is that the Russian economy is now in serious trouble. And it also is probably partly a business decision where they're saying, well, I'm not sure if our business can continue. But yeah, I think there should be much more focus on the brands who are greater enablers of powerful people in Russia than necessarily the high street ones.
But this epitomises the whole problem, that here we are talking about whether, Coca-Cola should be sold in Russia, fine. But the reality is that Ukraine is at war with Russia, and it's guns and troops that win wars. And this just points up to me the complete sort of ineffectiveness of not what we're doing just now, but years of policy towards Ukraine in which we've treated it as a kind of a way of posturing on the world stage. Actually, when it comes to it, we don't have the muscle, and we have to have this kind of conversation, which I'm sure Putin looks at and thinks that's why they're weak and that's why I can take them. Because it's come down to a matter of whether Russians can watch pornography instead of whether we have military muscle that can keep Putin from attacking countries that he just wants to attack.
Actually, I think it feeds into a larger story here that isn't just about whether we deploy boots on the ground or how we respond to this in sort of a defence way. It's more about how do we use our soft powers as much as we can in many different ways as we can to make sure that Russia feels as isolated as possible when they are committing these atrocious crimes. So when it comes to isolating them, how do we make sure that they feel like they are not a part of normal society? As you know from Boris Johnson's plan, that he wants to make sure that their society understands that this is not acceptable. And by enabling a position in which ordinary Russians feel that their lives have been affected in such an effective way, it makes them think, what is going on? What is happening? How can I understand further why all these everyday brands are going from my life? How come my life is getting more expensive, because it will get it more expensive? And how can I change this? What's going to happen for me? And it puts pressure on Putin's government.
Clearly, he doesn't care about that. Clearly, he doesn't, and that's why he's done what he's done. But actually, what he tells the Russian people is these people hate us, and that's why we need to fight them. And that's made the point for him.
And I think you're absolutely right there, Gareth, because anyone that sits there saying, oh, well, everyone's going to sit, all these Russian people are going to sit there going, oh, you know, all of these brands boycotting us are really bad. No, they're not. They're going to sit there and it will be propaganda to them that is actually, look at the West, look at what they're doing. It's them that's in the wrong. Anyway, I do want your thoughts. Keep them coming in. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about the refugee situation. There's been a lot of criticism today, levied at mainly, let's face it, Priti Patel, about what we're doing, or should I say perhaps not doing, here in the UK. What's your thoughts on all of this? Are we doing enough? Should we be doing more? We'll have that coming up after the break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Lots of response, I have to say, to that last topic. Lots of you disagreeing with me, which I don't mind. All opinions are valid here on Dewbs & Co. Daz is saying the only way, Michelle, to stop Putin is to turn the Russian people against him. The only way to do this is to make the public feel like they're suffering. But Daz, respectfully, you missed my point, because I don't actually believe that by these Western brands stopping selling to the consumers, I don't believe that will turn the Russian consumer against Putin. I think that will be leveraged by Putin to further turn that population against the West. That's what I fear will happen. And also, lots of you saying that I just don't get it. I do get it. I just don't agree with it. I find it, what some of these brands are doing, very hypocritical. I find it virtue signalling, because they don't have continuity. They're not applying this same kind of thought process into various other countries that have regimes that are doing things that they shouldn't be doing. There's no continuity there. And I'm just fed up, I guess, of hypocrisy generally. And you've got Trudeau swanning around meeting the Queen, talking about all these humanitarian things, when, you know, we've all seen what he's been doing to his own people over the last few months. And yes, OK, some of you will write in and say, Michelle, how dare you compare a war to the things of the truckers? But you get my point. You either respect human rights or you don't. But there you go, I'll park that one there. I'm sure lots of you will disagree with me on that as well. It's good to be back. I did miss you when I was all on holiday, I can tell you. Anyway, let's move on, shall we? Prime Minister Boris Johnson has promised to be, I quote, very generous towards Ukrainian refugees after it emerged that only 50 visas had apparently been granted since the conflict began. Now, I've got to say, confusion persists as to what this 50 number is because it was put out there, then it's kind of been questioned and denied. So I don't think we've really got the true figures. But there's certainly questions about whether or not more will be done to widen the access beyond the current schemes, which require Ukrainians either to have family here in the UK or have a designated UK sponsor for their application. And Home Secretary Priti Patel has said today that she was looking at creating a third humanitarian route for those fleeing the Russian invasion. But again, I think that was questioned because many people were saying it wasn't a third, but it was similar to the second after all. But Lucy Harris, your thoughts on all of this? Because, you know, let's boil it down. Let's ask the question, are we doing enough for refugees fleeing Ukraine?
You know, I think, you know, we're not in normal times. And of course, everybody wants to help them as much as we physically can. I think Michael Gove, he's started thinking about doing some sponsorship visas to speed up this process, and the government is expecting about 200,000 refugees to come to the UK, or at least to apply for visas in the next few months. We're only at the start of this, so obviously 50 visas doesn't seem like a lot right now, and it isn't, but we should be seeing something probably coming through the doors in a few months down the line. But absolutely, you know, I think everybody out there wants to help.
But hang on, a few months down the line, if you're a mom with your kid, desperate trying to get out of Ukraine now, and let's face it, who wouldn't want to get out of there, everything that's going on? Absolutely. You know, a few months down the line, you're not going to be sitting there going, oh, whew, you know, wait for a few months, are you?
No, and that's completely understandable. And I think there is going to be a bigger push, I think, behind the scenes to be able to do this sort of stuff and to be able to make sure that we get as many refugees through the door as possible. I know that obviously some people in government has put it down to security concerns and bureaucracy concerns, and I think that does shed a light onto how we do our sort of our administration here in this country. I think there's too much red tape, and I think there's too much bureaucracy in times of need such as this one.
Laurie, do you think we're doing enough?
No. I mean, this is a European-wide tragedy. There are millions of people will ultimately be forced from Ukraine. We've seen, all of us have seen the extraordinary suffering on television screens. People across this country, in the way, you know, as they always do, are being generous and donating food and clothing and nappies and millions upon millions of pounds. And that we're hearing these such small figures. I appreciate we may get some more official ones later today, compared to the numbers of people that other European countries are accepting with open arms, is a national shame. And I think a lot of people are feeling that right now. It is in the gift of the government to change its rules, to move procedures around so that we can support people from Ukraine to be relocated here, to be looked after. And it is incumbent upon not just countries in mainland Europe, not just the UK, but others around the world to do that. And we're not stepping up to do that at the moment. I think it's shameful.
Do you think it's shameful, our response, Gareth?
Well, I don't really trust Priti Patel on immigration. I think she has quite a jaundiced view of how most people in this country view immigration, and I think she always tends to resort to a more authoritarian approach. That's just my observation over the past year of how Priti Patel's approached this. But having said that, I don't think there are any immigration officials sitting at desks looking at immigration applications from Ukraine and saying, well, no, let's just put that back for a few weeks. I just don't think that's happening. I mean, recently we saw the response to the British state to the Hong Kong situation and taking on enormous numbers of immigrants into the country from Hong Kong. I'm sure this will happen again here. I think Lucy's right. I think there is too much bureaucracy in the system. I think it's a very complex situation. Many Ukrainians don't actually want to leave. Most of them are going into countries such as Poland, where they hope at some point, presumably, to be able to come back again. England is a very distant destination in that sense compared to a lot of European countries. So I think the picture is a lot more complicated, actually, than, again, you used the word virtue signalling before. But I think it is this, this spat with France over immigration has predated this crisis. If the French Interior Minister has an opportunity to say, look at those Brexiteers on that little island there who will do anything to keep people out, then he will. I think that's the context of this argument. It's not actually to do with the intention of the British system to keep out Ukrainian immigrants.
Yeah, I mean, Laurie, I suspect the flip side of what we're saying here is we're talking about bureaucracy, we're talking about small numbers, we're talking about process. I guess perhaps the flip side, if I'm going to play devil's advocate to this, and I am playing devil's advocate because, like anyone, I watch these images of these mums with their children, and I just want to scoop them all up and get them all to safety. But I guess the flip side to this would be you've got to make sure as well that you're processing people properly. You're doing the right checks and balances to keep the population safe, I guess, would be the argument coming back from the flip side of that. How would you respond to that?
And it's perfectly possible to do that and to accept more people into a country. We see that all around the world. You know, there are lots of wars that have happened at the moment in years gone by, and lots of people have had to flee places. They often want to stay, and many of them do, and suffer in the region that they've been displaced from. But there are mechanisms which countries like the UK can implement where they can still let more people in and have certain checks and balances on the numbers that come in. And there have been many countries that have been torn to pieces by war in recent years, and the regime for letting refugees in has, we've heard this many times from organisations, become harder and harder and harder, created a hostile environment for people coming to the UK. And if people out there are surprised that it's hard for some Ukrainians to come into this country, they're hitting up against the same kind of barriers that have been presented for other people suffering from war.
I don't think that's fair. I don't think that pretty much anyone actually would be hostile to a mom and her child escaping. I mean, I'm showing imagery on the screen now for those of you that are listening on the radio instead of watching. I mean, we're seeing burning buildings, we're seeing their homes being bombed, etc. I don't think anyone would be hostile to mums, children, etc., who want to escape that. I think where the hostility comes from, to quote your word, would be when you've got people that are paying smugglers to get them into the UK as economic migrants. That's what people would be hostile to.
But if I may, it's not necessarily a direct hostility. It's like a bureaucratic hostility. If you're in a situation where you're fleeing war or suffering in your particular country, right, and you've got to fill out reams of forms, you've got to have certain, references you've got to have, and the list goes on and on and on and on. Sometimes those are going above the threshold that we would normally say, okay, there has to be a threshold where that person is clearly fit to be able to come into the country. We're not letting, obvious criminals into the country, right? There is a threshold where you can say, okay, we passed that threshold. And then you can layer on more and more bureaucracy on top of that just to start to deter people indirectly. You're not saying, hey, mum and kid, you're not coming in. You're placing the barrier, you're making the barrier higher and higher and higher for them to jump over to be able to get in. And that has what we've been told this many times by many groups that represent refugees. That barrier has been raised higher and higher as the years have gone on, and it's what's partly happening here, I think.
But Laurie, that's undoubtedly the case. I think you're absolutely right on that. But what I don't understand in this argument is France is presumably saying to the UK, you should be lifting these controls and just taking as many as possible. And in the same breath, the French Interior Minister then goes on to say, but you're not taking your fair share. So he doesn't have to say that bit, because France could just admit as many Ukrainian refugees as turn up at the border. He could do that. Why does he have to say to the UK, you're not doing enough? We know why. We know exactly why. It's the B word.
And I won't defend the French government in this case, right? I'm more interested in how we can, irrelevant what French politicians are saying to us, change systems in this country, because right now people are being exposed to the injustices that we see in that bureaucratic barrier having been raised higher and higher. And now, hopefully, we can talk about how it should be changed so that people in these positions can...
I'd absolutely agree with you. I think, in general, how government is run and how we run our society is way too bureaucratic. I think it's so overly complex that ordinary people, not just refugees, but ordinary people in general, almost get a barrier to actually understanding how they can succeed. I mean, even just applying for daily things is incredibly difficult. through government schemes. And I just think it's one of those things that has to be focused on, about diminishing bureaucracy throughout the system. I totally agree with you on that one. That's one I can agree with you on.
Oh, well, there you go. Bureaucracy. Is that what is holding it up? Do we need more bureaucracy or less? Let's cut there to our reporter now, Bradley Harris, to get the latest on his view there. Bradley, good evening to you.
Good evening. Yes, good evening. I'm at the Poland-Ukraine border. Currently behind me there are Polish police guarding one of the main border crossings from Ukraine into Poland. And if we just come around this way, you'll really see the extent to how many Ukrainians are looking to flee their country and enter bordering countries such as Poland, where we are now. You can see security keeping people in place, waiting for the next coach to arrive, and they have been arriving all day, every day for the last 12 days. This isn't just a 9 to 5 operation, this is 24 hours a day, getting people, civilians, out of Ukraine and into places like Poland for safety, for a place to sleep, somewhere to eat, somewhere to drink. And all day this afternoon I've been standing here walking up and down this street. You can see some trolleys in the distance there with food, with clothes. They've been donated by Polish people who are willing to give up what they have for those who now have nothing. Many Ukrainians who have been turning up across the border today have been turning up with only the clothes they have on their back. I've been looking at coaches that have been pulling up, looking up at the window, and there's been people of all ages, older people, younger people, little boys, little girls who are faces pressed against the window, some looking exhausted, tired, because don't forget, for many people, which would normally be a 5 to 6 hour journey from Lviv over to where we are standing now, to the border with Poland, 5 to 6 hours, but actually they've been in the car for 20, 30 hours tops. So for many people it's been an exhausting journey, but for some that journey is almost over.
Goodness me, Bradley Harris, thanks for that update there. It is absolutely, it's just heartbreaking, isn't it? Can we imagine, can any of us imagine how it must be to feel that 1 minute you're in relative safety and then the next to be there with your babies at a border like that? It is, as I said, just heartbreaking. I'm intrigued to know, do you think we should be doing more? And if so, the question is, what does that look like? Now, I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about the cost of pretty much everything now is going to be going up, isn't it? Food, gas, oil. How are we going to cope with this? What do we do next? Especially when it comes to energy, by the way. We've seen, again, prices going up and up. And as I said, unfortunately, it's going to keep continuing going up. We'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Now, we're focusing a lot on the Russia-Ukraine situation, been speaking before the earlier break about sanctions, whether they're right, whether they're wrong, whether they're targeted in the right place, and whether, crucially, they'll actually be effective. And of course, there will be consequences, broad consequences for many of these sanctions. For example, energy prices. We talk a lot about the cost of living here, don't we? And what's going to impact on that? And the cost of living, energy prices in particular as well, will be soaring after Western sanctions on Russian exports are likely to deepen the cost of living as well. Latest figures show average petrol prices have reached £1.55.62p. Well, the price of diesel reached a record high of £1.61.28p here in the UK. I mean, I've got to be honest, how on earth, if you're sitting at home at the moment, I am intrigued. How do you feel right now about your energy bills? There's prospects of the average energy bills surging beyond £3,000 annually without any government intervention. You know, Laurie Lebon, I'm just going to cut to the chase and come to you. There's so many people that are genuinely worried right now about, you know, how they are going to afford to live. And we're talking about these sanctions, and we're talking about people will be saying about get off the dependency of Russian gas and all the rest of it. All of these things are going to be pushing the cost of living further and further up. What should we be doing?
Immediately, the government needs to be providing support to people's bills and their living circumstances. That can come from getting rid of certain taxes or measures on people's energy bills, say, which I think probably could be then paid for by a windfall tax on the energy companies who are making huge amounts of money from the fact that the energy price has been high before this crisis and has spiked subsequently. And then also probably restoring the £20 uplift on universal credit that we saw in the context of COVID to further help people in the greatest trouble. In some ways, we've got to think about this current moment as another crisis coming upon us in some ways like COVID did, and that requires unprecedented support from the government to support day-to-day families. Into the longer term, I mean, beyond literally days and weeks, we need to continue the process of being less dependent on these crazy gas prices and insulating our homes and moving towards renewable energy and batteries and heat pumps and so on will help in that process. And that's one of the reasons why I agree with the government in wanting to double down on making sure we're no longer dependent on Putin for gas and on crazy international gas prices. And of course that, we were talking about sanctions earlier, that has a much more direct impact on the Russian state. It's from selling oil and gas that a lot of government revenues come. And the invasion force that's entered into Ukraine and is committing all the things that we're seeing on the TV is partly funded by countries outside of Russia buying oil and gas. So moving away from a dependence in the UK will also help us in this longer run process of reducing Putin's power globally.
Yeah, Chris has just emailed in, by the way. I was just talking about some of the prices of petrol and diesel. Chris says, in my village, Michelle, diesel is £1.79. Goodness me, where on earth do you live, Chrissy? Gareth, I mean, I have to say, Laurie, there's a lot that I want to respond to you on that. In particular, I want to drill down on your concept of a windfall tax. But before you hear from me again, let's bring Gareth in response. What are we going to do about these rising costs?
I liked a lot of what Laurie was suggesting in terms of immediate measures, but from my perspective, this crisis has come about because we've tried to be less dependent on gas, and we can't be. So what that actually means is not that the policy enacted means we don't become less dependent on gas, we become more dependent on the fluctuation of global gas prices. And that's really what's brought this crisis about. And, I think probably everyone is is now aware that a very small percentage of British gas comes from Russia. I think it's about 5% or perhaps even
here,
less.
it's much broader across Europe, obviously, collectively, but here it's
Indeed. I mean, Germany's in real trouble. 60%, I think, of its supply was coming from Russia. In this country, we could have, if we hadn't put a block on fracking, if we had not stripped out our gas storage supply, we would be in a much, much better position now. And the sort of endless argument that the problem here is that we've just got this addiction to fossil fuels and we need to wean ourselves off it is making the problem worse and worse and worse. And, take the case of Germany. If Germany had kept up its nuclear programme, of which it was an absolute world leader, in this current crisis where Russia turns off the gas supply, Germany would be in a much, much better position. And I think more people are probably going to die due to the fact that they can't heat their homes in Germany than anything to do with a climate crisis in that country. And so when it comes to the argument about long-term and reducing our dependence on gas, I just think it's absolutely crazy.
Lucy?
Well, I'd first off push back on a few of the ideas about how we resolve this situation. And partly we're in this situation because we have triggered more inflation because of our COVID spending. We have spent about £250 billion trying to sustain ourselves during COVID in the last 2 years, and that's brought about an increase in inflation, which has meant that prices have increased. So therefore, how do we do it? We don't do it by more public spending. I think that would be a completely, sort of cyclical way of trying to resolve a problem which will never end. It just means more spending, more spending, more spending, and the same problem trying to recur again and again. What you need to do is cut taxes wherever you can to be able to stimulate an economy and stimulate growth within an economy, which then stimulates spending. And therefore, you can have a situation where you get out of this loop of continuous government spending, which I just don't think is the answer.
But then what would you say back to that? Because you talk, I mean, I was listening intently to what you're saying, and I disagreed with a lot of it, Laurie. Like, for example, you will talk about windfall taxes. And what I find fascinating about the whole concept of doing a windfall tax on an energy company is that we are very much going to be in a situation where we need a lot of these energy organisations to start investing in alternate infrastructure to remove various different dependencies that we have. Mm-hmm. So we need to encourage them to have their profits, to reinvest these profits, to get us away from the situations that we're currently in, point one. Point two, what I find really interesting when people talk about windfall tax on energy companies, not too long ago, these energy companies were really having their profits, etc., hit massively when prices were in the decline. And when you start talking about market or government interference in these companies, why does it only go one way? Why, when they're making money, are we desperate to get our hands and grab their profits? But actually, when they're struggling, the same people don't then call for subsidies to those companies.
So those companies already get vast subsidies from the British government. In fact, the British government is one of the most generous provider of subsidies to oil and gas companies, more than any other country almost in the world, right? So when the prices are high or they're low, they're getting massive handouts, those companies, right? So when the price is going higher, I think it's totally proportionate for the government representing us to say, okay, hang on a minute, we give you loads of money anyway, but now you're earning bucket loads, maybe let's take some of those profits back, right? You could have it, sure. So the windfall tax had an exemption on it where you said, unless you invest that money into helping us insulate our homes and develop more renewable energy and battery power so we become less dependent upon oil and gas. I totally agree with that. But we need, in the immediate term now, some of those windfall profits could be put towards the people who I'm sure who are watching this evening who are having to make horrendous decisions between how they can heat their homes and how they can make other choices like eating. And inflationary impacts and stuff have come from external sources. Gas is high not because of government spending. Gas is high because there's less of it to go around at the moment for a load of factors, including high demand off the back of the pandemic as economies opened and the fact that it's colder and the fact that Russia went and invaded Ukraine. And so the government needs to be helping as many people as possible to get through this really difficult period. and taking a bit more money off the top of the profits of businesses that the government already gives loads of handouts to as they make bumper profits it's a very easy, proportionate thing to do, and I think it's absolutely right for this current moment.
Interesting. Well, there you go. I don't agree with the windfall taxes. Laurie absolutely does. Which side of the fence are you on? Do you think that these companies should be getting their profits? Let's stick with what it is, a windfall tax. Do you agree with that or not? Someone else has just been in touch, and I'm frantically trying to find it. The thing is, my inbox fills, and I've lost your name, but you just wrote in with an interesting question. You were saying to me, Michelle, you keep talking about the cost of living, but you asked me, what happened to cutting your exact sentence, and you'll know who you are. You just asked me what happened to cutting your cloth accordingly, reducing your outgoings to match your incomings. And I think that's an interesting point you raised there. I cannot remember your name, so I do have to apologise. But what would you say then to this person, Ken? Ken has emailed in saying, Michelle, I'm retired and disabled. I need a warm home or I can't breathe, or move. My energy bill has just increased from $180 a month to $330 a month as of April. My benefits have risen £2 a week and I have no idea how I'm going to pay. He says it's no longer a choice of heating or eating. I cannot afford to do either, and neither can a lot of my other disabled friends. I am truly scared. See, I feel desperately sad, actually, when I hear messages like that, Ken. And I hope that you are okay, and I hope that you are getting support from wherever it is that you can get support from, because in this day and age, I don't believe that anyone should be sitting there genuinely not being able to afford food, or genuinely not being able to afford to heat their home, especially not in this weather. Lots of conversation as well about what the EU is doing in this situation, and the topic, perhaps we'll do it tomorrow instead, is you might have seen that Ukraine is asking to fast-track entry to membership to the European Union. What do you think to that? I might touch on that one tomorrow. Do you think the European Union should be expanding to include countries like Ukraine? Bernard says, lots of you getting in contact, of course, about refugees. Lots of you are asking, I have to say that the vast sentiment is that most of you are very sympathetic and open and warm to the refugees. Some of you are asking questions. Jack is saying, I feel desperately sorry for all Ukrainians, but we also have to balance this with checks to see who is coming into the country. Mike says, Michelle, we just have to pull out all the stops to allow these folk to get into any country of safety, whether that is within the EU or here in the UK. Susan says, I am amazed that the UK are not doing more. There you go. Let me know your thoughts on all of that. Some of you, again, are saying on the energy side of it, Bernard is saying we should take the green subsidies off our energy bills. I'd certainly be in favour of that one. What about you? Anyway, that's all we've got time for tonight, I'm afraid. Thank you very much to my panel. Lots of you are keeping your thoughts coming in. I have to say as well, just to reassure you all, I read all of your messages. If I can't read them whilst I'm live on air, then I certainly read them over the course of the evening. So do keep them coming in. We'll be back tomorrow exactly the same time, 6 o'clock till 7 o'clock. Have yourself a very good evening in the meantime. Thanks again to my panel. And thank you at home for your company. I'll see you tomorrow.
Good evening. Clear skies for many of us overnight, which will allow it to turn pretty chilly for tomorrow morning. A breezy day with plenty of sunshine again across eastern areas. Further west, however,